Let's talk about IVUS. I think we've all had a resurgence in interest in intravascular imaging with the recent changes to the ESC guidelines, which now show a Class 1A. And really that's been built on a plethora of evidence, part of which really cultivated from the meta-analysis that happened last year, which showed not only a benefit in target lesion failure, but a benefit in cardiac death and death. So I'm going to speak to you specifically about why is it that we like to use intravascular imaging? Well, the point of intravascular imaging is to really help me do the procedure because honestly, I, like you, can do it using the angiogram. What is it that I need for me to limit the barriers to intravascular imaging? One is you got to make the setup fast. No interventional cardiologist wants to wait for anything ever. Certainly not to do an adjunctive technology. Make the user interface easy. I don't want it to be overcomplicated. I don't want 7 million buttons like on a CT scan. I just want it to be simple to focus on the features that I need. I need to be able to get the catheter to where I want to. I think we've all been plagued by this in intravascular imaging, is pure durability and deliverability of the catheter. And the final thing is, let me see. So this is the Assist HD IVUS catheter, the Kodama. And let me show you how quickly you can set this up. So basically, you take this catheter out, and within just a few seconds after flushing, we're able to connect this into the bag, connect the plastic cover to allow the inlet from the dock, and the catheter is connected. And you can see as soon as you connect, it gets an imaging catheter sign and we can move forward. The user interface for this technology is really very, very easy. What you can see is image, and that's to get an image, record, and perform a pullback. So there aren't a million different other screens that we need or use. The user interface focuses on bookmarking, toggling, and deleting. And finally, you have the ability to make notes such as default or custom and look at everything in high resolution. The nice thing about the Assist HD IVUS catheter is it's very lightweight. The PIM and the LTS, all of the dock together, can be moved very easily. And it's got a very fast pullback. But by far, I think the best thing about the Assist HD IVUS catheter is the deliverability. This delivers like a microcatheter. There is no other imaging device which delivers as good as the HD IVUS. And if you try it for the first time, you'll see that it can even deliver into areas where microcatheters can't. That's a combination of its stability as well as its stiffness. And this is the user interface. It's all touchscreen, just like your iPhone. You use your finger to toggle through the different setup and the user interface. You can do that either by yourself, by taking off your gloves, or even using the back of the syringe. The Assist catheter and device actually comes with a pen, which will allow you to interact directly with the screen. So you can see that using the user interface here is really very, very easy. This is the evolution of IVUS. You can see on the far left-hand side, we have 20 megahertz IVUS, and then we got to 40 megahertz IVUS, and finally, what we can see in the 60 megahertz IVUS is the layers of the plaque. Have you ever thought about why we use the term plaque on IVUS anyway, and not fibrous tissue or lipidic tissue? The reason was the original IVUS that was created by Paul Yock, all you could see was plaque or no plaque. You couldn't differentiate the features of the different types, calcium, fibrous, and lipidic. But now, using high definition IVUS, you can see the layers of the artery, the external elastic lamina, internal elastic lamina, lumen, and plaque. So, how can you help me? You can help me determine the morphology, you can help me determine the length, you can help me determine the diameter, and post-PCI, I want to know whether there's a dissection, whether the stent is floating, and whether or not the stent is expanded. So you've all heard about MLD Max. This was a brainchild of ours in St. Francis, and now it's used around the world. So let's do a case together. Here's a patient with a tight mid-LED lesion, and so let's go through an imaging-guided PCI with the Assist microcatheter. So the first thing we want to do is remember about morphology. If you think about the morphology, these are the layers of the artery. the intima, which is like a scoring pad, the interelastic lamina, which is like a rubber band, the media, which is like a dense sponge, the extrenelastic lamina, which is a rubber band, and the adventitia, which is like a mesh. We can see all of those artery layers on HD IVUS. The same layers, intima, interelastic lamina, media, extrenelastic lamina, and adventitia. And the reason that's important is it highlights for us a simple strategy to perform imaging guided interpretation. And so the question here is there plaque? If not, you can move forward. If it's yes, is it in the lumen or the wall? And then it's based on the acoustic properties. And there's really just two of them. Is the sound sucked up or is the sound reflected? And if the sound is reflected and there's a shadow, there's calcium. And if the sound is sucked up, it's basically lipid or thrombus. And so here's an example of how we can use the HD IVUS system, which has excellent resolution, and scroll through a plaque to determine what the lesion looks like. Here you can see all three layers of the artery. You find a little bit of calcific plaque. Here's some more calcific plaque. And actually you see that's really all of the information that we need as we get into the left main. So what do we see? We see the following plaque types within the lesion. We see fibrous tissue, which we can detect very easily on the left side. We see a calcified lesion in the middle, which is already fractured. And in the proximal segment, we have some hypoecheric area, which is lipid. The second thing we want to do once we've done that is determine the length. And so we determine the length is we look for a segment that's normal, and we define that as having a plaque burden of less than 50% at either edge of the lesion. So here distally we have a normal vessel, but here proximally we have some calcified plaque and we don't want to land here. So what we want to do is actually find a segment that's more normal just proximal to this. And here, if we reposition our scroll marker only a few millimeters more proximally, you can see that we can actually end up going from normal to normal. And this is how you do this in real time. You basically scroll into the plaque, and then we scroll out of the plaque until we find a normal segment, and now we place a bookmark. Okay? So now we've bookmarked this territory. We can go through the plaque proximally until we find a normal segment. And sometimes it can't be completely normal, but here is a nice size vessel that looks normal. Once we do that, we're going to take the measurement from the distal marker to the proximal marker. And we do that simply by putting our finger on it and scrolling. And we can see here we need a 23 millimeter device. What about diameter? For diameter, if we have a plaque burden that's less than 50%, we're going to be using the extrenelastic lamina. If we have a plaque burden that's greater than 50% in a diffusely diseased vessel, we're going to use the lumen upsize. That gives us safety to prevent edge dissections. Let's see how we do that. We've already bookmarked our segments. So at the distal reference, we're going to make a measurement from the extrenelastic lamina to the extrenelastic lamina. And here we get a measurement of 3.89 by 3.72. And we go proximally, make the same measurements. All easy to see because it's very easy to see the extrenelastic lamina. And as a result, we've got our measurements. So at the distal reference, we measure 3.98 by 3.72. We round down to the closest stent size, that's 3.5. We're going to do the same thing in the proximal, and the proximal vessel is going to be 4.0. Now what we're going to do next is look at our proximal segment, and you can see the measurements come at 4.71 and 4.73. We're going to round down to a 4.5. So what we do here is we've planned our strategy just like a TAVR, right? We need a 3.5 by 23 millimeter stent. We're going to direct stent because there's no calcium, and we're going to use a 4.5 by 8 proximal optimization balloon. And so we decided to dilate the side branch just because it was a very tight lesion. And then this is how we co-register the Kodama IVUS. What we do is we take a cine angiogram of the IVUS at the distal reference. And then we leave that on the screen, don't move the camera, and we place the distal marker of the stent in the same place. And you can co-register that to within only a few millimeters. Once you've done that, we do our proximal optimization technique. And And you can see we're at a 4.5 by 8, just like we planned previously. Post-procedure, we want to be looking for medial dissections. So at the distal reference, we make a measurement. And then we scroll over to the proximal reference, and we can see very, very quickly that we don't have an edge dissection. When we look for apposition, this is simply a quick perusal through the artery to make sure that there's no dark areas right behind the stent. And we can see that the stent is fully opposed. Finally, we're going to measure expansion. And there's lots of ways to do this, but probably the one that with the greatest evidence is to make sure the MSA is greater than the distal reference. So what we do is find the distal edge, and then we scroll through the artery, and this part we have to do manually, and find the minimal stent area throughout the stent. And I'm going to say it looks somewhere around here. So we're going to go ahead and make our measurement. And that's how quickly you can do this. And now what you can see is the distal reference area is 6.639, and the proximal reference, or the, minimal stent area is 5.15, so the stent is underexpanded. Now the nice thing is we can also detect how far from the stent edge the underexpansion is. And you can see that I've measured it here to be 9.5 millimeters from the distal stent edge. That means that I can use my post-dilation balloon in a very focused area, staying away from the edge. So I went back with the same size NC balloon in the distal half, 3.5, expanded it at 20 atmospheres, and now you can see we went from 5.5 to 6.7. So the question is, when you have a different number of IVUSs, why should you use HD? Because what is it that you actually care about when you're doing an intravascular imaging assessment? You want to be able to see, you want it to be fast, and you want it to be accurate and precise. And so, as I showed you earlier, the evolution of IVUS is getting us to the point at which we can look at the vascular layers. And look even at this example of the same system at looking at 40 hertz and 60 megahertz. And you can see very easily the difference in being able to look at the cap thickness, which disappears as you use 40 hertz. Also, we've got a very rapid pullback on the Assist HD IVUS. You can get a 60 megahertz at 60 frames with an acquisition time of the entire vessel within a few seconds. And so this very rapid pullback actually minimizes ischemic time, but also allows you to do something that I'm doing here, and that's clearing the lumen with saline. So if you do a saline-guided IVUS pullback, that blood speckle that can often be difficult to determine whether or not you have a dissection, that all disappears. So you can do a saline-guided run. Remember that axial resolution of this is absolutely fantastic. So the axial resolution is 40 microns. It's getting close to OCT. So you're able to see these features of the plaque that you're otherwise not able to see. The other thing to remember that I was talking about earlier is when you look at the different imaging modalities, you'll find that conventional IVUS oversizes the artery by about 8%, but high definition IVUS does not. High definition IVUS, OCT, and phantom all measure exactly the same. So you have very high reliability in your measurement complexes. So the final question is why HD? And we left it off with, is there any other way to live? So thanks very much.